Jessica's fingers found something wrong. She was crouched under a table in the fanciest restaurant in Seoul, reaching for a dropped napkin. Her fingers touched the underside of the table's edge and stopped. The substance was clear, slightly sticky, pressed carefully into the groove where someone's hand would rest without thinking. She knew what it was. 3 years ago, in a hospital in Lagos, a doctor had pressed her fingers against a surface just like this one. He was trying to teach her what to look for in case her brother Chidi got better and accidentally touched it again. Chidi did not get better. Jessica's hand did not shake. Her face did not change. She picked up the napkin, stood up straight, placed a dish in front of the guest beside her, and smiled at something he said that she didn't actually hear. Then she walked toward the man who was about to die and whispered 3 words behind his ear. Stay with this story, because what happens next is not what anyone expects. Jessica Obi was 27 years old and had been living in Seoul for 2 years and 4 months. She knew the exact count because she had started keeping track the morning she landed at the airport, carrying 2 suitcases and a grief so fresh it still hurt when she reached for things. She worked at Jungsik, a private restaurant in the Itaewon neighborhood that had no sign outside and didn't take bookings from people who had to ask how to find it. The guests arrived in dark cars. They paid in cash. They didn't ask her name, and she didn't ask theirs. That arrangement was perfect for Jessica. She had learned a long time ago, back in Lagos, that being noticed had a cost, especially for women who looked like her and carried what she carried. So she had trained herself to move through rooms without disturbing them. Eyes open, head down, hands always busy. In 2 years at Jungsik, not one regular customer had learned her name. Inside her locker, tucked behind her coat, there was a laminated photograph. She did not look at it before every shift. She didn't need to. Tonight, the head server Ji-yun had pulled her aside in the back hallway before service started. The fluorescent light above them was harsh and unflattering. "The man hosting tonight," Ji-yun said, keeping her voice low, "is Sungwon Sok." Jessica didn't recognize the name. Ji-yun's face told her that was about to become a problem. "Don't be memorable tonight," Ji-yun said. "Whatever you see, whatever you hear, you were not here." "When am I ever here?" Jessica said. Ji-yun looked at her for a long moment and said nothing else. The guests arrived one group at a time. Jessica watched through the small window above the kitchen pass. They all moved the way powerful people move slowly, like the room belonged to them before they walked in. Security guards stood at both entrances, but they blended in so well, you'd almost miss them. Song Won-sok arrived third, silver hair, unhurried, the kind of still that comes from decades of people moving out of your way. He sat at the head of the table and looked around the room with the quiet satisfaction of a man who already knew how the night would end. The last guest arrived 40 minutes after everyone else. Dark coat, no visible bodyguards. He came alone. Every other man at that table was performing something their wealth, their power, their calm, showing off for each other without saying a word. This man sat down and simply existed, and the room quietly reorganized itself around him without him asking it to. Jessica noticed this, filed it away, and kept moving. She didn't know his name yet. The first course passed without any problems. Jessica worked the far end of the table, moving with the quiet efficiency that had made her Ji-yun's most trusted server. She was invisible. She was good at that. Then, during the second course, a guest knocked his napkin off his lap. Small thing, happened all the time. Jessica was already moving toward it. She crouched down. Her right hand reached for the napkin. Her left hand touched the table's edge to steady herself, and her fingertips grazed the inner rail underneath. Everything narrowed. The substance was clear, slightly sticky, carefully placed in the groove where someone resting their hand on the table edge would make full contact without realizing it. Jessica's throat tightened before a single thought formed in her head. Her vision sharpened at the center. Her body understood before her mind caught up 19 days in a Lagos hospital ward. A doctor's careful voice, Chidi's breathing changing at night, in ways she had learned to hear from across the room. She had touched this before. She knew exactly what it was. She did not need to confirm it. The confirmation was already in her hands. Jessica stood up, replaced the napkin on the guest's lap, smiled, continued her circuit around the table water refill at the far end, a small fork adjustment, a quiet acknowledgement of a guest who needed something. Her hands were completely steady. She made sure of that. In the service corridor, she stopped with her back against the wall. The kitchen clattered normally behind her. Ji-yeon's voice directed the plating. Everything sounded exactly the same as it always did. She looked through the small window. Song-won-suk was watching the table. His hands were folded on the tablecloth. His jaw was relaxed. He was not eating. He had the expression of a man watching a plan work exactly as intended. At the other end of the table, the man in the dark coat was leaning into a conversation with the guest beside him, one hand gesturing as he talked. His other hand rested on the table edge, fingers loose, relaxed, moving slowly toward the rail. Jessica pushed back through the door before she finished deciding. She was not being brave. She understood that clearly. Bravery means you have a safe choice, and you don't take it. What moved Jessica back through that door was not courage. It was something Chidi's death had installed in her 3 years ago, something that worked faster than fear and did not ask her permission first. She moved around the table at a normal pace, adjusted a placement, refilled a glass, a natural circuit, nothing worth watching. When she reached his chair, she leaned across him to adjust a dish, a small, ordinary gesture that lasted half a second. She brought her mouth close to the space behind his ear. 3 words, just above silence, in Korean. Under your table. She kept walking, moved to the next guest, did not look at his face or his hands. Across the table, Song-won-seok's eyes moved from the man in the dark coat to her. Jessica was already at the far end, refilling a water glass, her back to him. But she felt it, the exact moment his attention found her. He did not look away. Jessica just risked everything for a man she doesn't even know with 3 words and a steady hand. If this story already has you holding your breath, hit the like button right now so I know you're watching. And drop the name of the city you're coming from in the comments. I want to see how far Jessica's story is traveling. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Because what Song-won-suk does next is the reason this story gets dangerous. The dinner ended early. Jessica was clearing glasses from the far end of the table when it happened. Ryu Ha-jun received a phone call, real or invented, she couldn't tell. He stood, said something brief to the table, and within 90 seconds, 2 men who had been sitting as regular guests all evening moved quietly to either side of Song-won-suk. No raised voices, no confusion. Just a calm, efficient walk toward the side entrance. Song-won-suk went with them. His face stayed pleasant the entire time, which was the most frightening thing about it. Jessica kept clearing glasses. At the door, Ha-jun stopped. He turned, not scanning the room, not checking his surroundings. He turned deliberately, and his eyes traveled the full length of the restaurant and found her specifically. 3 seconds, then he left. Jessica set a glass on her tray and told herself it was over. 4 days later, she was sitting on a bench beside the Han River. She stopped there sometimes on her way home just to sit for a few minutes, watch the water, breathe air that didn't smell like a kitchen. The river was wide and gray and asked nothing from her. She had been sitting for less than 30 seconds when a man sat down beside her. She had not heard him approach. He was completely unremarkable, middle-aged, plain coat, forgettable face. He opened a folder on his lap and tilted it in her direction. Just enough. Just long enough. Inside was a photograph. Her mother's house in Enugu, the front gate, the orange tree her mother had planted the year Jessica was born. The image was recent. The tree had been trimmed in a way Jessica had only seen this past Christmas, when her mother sent a short video. Someone had been standing outside her mother's gate with a camera recently. The man closed the folder. stood up, walked away without saying a single word. Jessica gripped the edge of the bench. She sat there for 9 minutes, watching the clock on her phone without really seeing it. The river moved past. A couple jogged by. A child threw something into the water and laughed. She stood up and walked home. 3 days after that, a letter arrived. Official letterhead. Polite, careful language. Her visa renewal, which she had filed 6 weeks ago, had been placed under additional review. No timeline given. She could not leave South Korea while the file was open. If the visa was denied, she could not legally keep working. She read it twice, folded it neatly, put it in her bag. That afternoon, she took 2 buses to the immigration office in Mapogu and sat across from a clerk under cold white lights. The clerk had a kind face and no useful information. "Who started the review?" Jessica asked. "I can't share that. What can I do to speed it up?" "There's no process for that. I'm sorry." "What?" Jessica said, more quietly. "Can I do?" The clerk's hand stopped moving on her keyboard. She looked genuinely sorry. "Nothing right now. I'm really sorry." Jessica thanked her and left. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and unhelpful. She stood on the pavement and understood, very clearly, what was happening to her. Not a direct threats gave you something to fight. This was different. This was one door closing, then another, then a window, slow and patient and invisible from the outside. Someone was building walls around her life, brick by brick. That night, she called her mother. She didn't mention the letter. She didn't mention the photograph. She asked about the garden, the neighbor's new baby, what was on the stove. Her mother's voice was warm and unhurried, full of small, ordinary details about a life Jessica had left behind to come here. "That sounds so good, Mama," she said. "I love you." She ended the call and sat in the quiet of her apartment. Chidi had built a soul playlist on his phone in the months before he died. 94 songs, sorted by neighborhood Itaewon at night, Bukchon in autumn, Namsan at dawn. He had researched a city he never reached. He had been getting ready. Jessica stood up and turned on the light. On her bed, half hidden under her coat, was the bag she had started packing without noticing. Not fully just the important things, her documents. The laminated photograph from her locker. Chidi's USB drive with his music. She stood at the foot of the bed and looked at it for a long moment. Then she unzipped it and took everything out and put it all back where it belonged, documents in the drawer, photograph back in her coat pocket, USB on the shelf. She didn't say anything to herself. She didn't need to. Unpacking the bag was enough. The next morning, Ji-yeon found her in the back kitchen folding napkins before the lunch shift. The overhead light in there had been slightly yellow for months, a bulb nobody had replaced. Ji-yeon leaned against the counter and watched Jessica work. "You should leave the city," Ji-yeon said. Jessica kept folding. "I'm not finished here." "Finished with what?" Ji-yeon's voice was careful, almost gentle. "You don't have anything holding you here, Jessica. You could go home." The napkin in Jessica's hands was already folded. She folded it again anyway. "I'm not finished," she said. Ji-yeon looked at her for a long moment, then pushed off the counter and left. The door swung once behind her and went still. The afternoon service was quiet. Jessica worked her section on muscle memory 2 years of the same movements, the same routes between tables, the same small courtesies. A guest at table 7 ordered nothing past the first glass of water. He sat for 40 minutes, checked his phone twice, and left without asking for a bill. Jessica went to clear the table. Under his plate was a small white card, a phone number in clean, small print. No name, no message, nothing to explain what answering it would mean. She was still holding it when Ji-yeon appeared at her elbow. "Who is that from?" Jessica flipped the card over, blank on the other side. "I don't know yet," she said. Ji-yeon moved closer and lowered her voice. "Jessica, On Tuesday, your day off, someone came in and sat in your section. Didn't order anything. Didn't ask for anyone. She stopped. Stayed 2 full hours, then left. Jessica looked down at the number on the card. She put it in her apron pocket, picked up the empty water glass, and went back to work. 1 week after the dinner, Ryu Hajun walked into Jungsik without a reservation. No security visible, no phone call ahead. He came during the quieter part of afternoon service, when only a few tables were occupied and the kitchen ran at half pace. He stood at the entrance for exactly 2 seconds, scanning the room, then walked to a table in Jessica's section and sat down. He did not pick up the menu. Across the restaurant, Ji-yun saw him first. She straightened, smoothed her apron, and started moving toward his table with the careful attention she reserved for guests who required careful attention. Jessica stepped in front of her without a word. Ji-yun stopped, looked at her. Jessica was already walking toward the table with a water jug, her face arranged into the neutral expression she had spent 2 years perfecting. She knew this was not a small thing, intercepting Ji-yun like that. She did it anyway. She set the water glass down in front of him. The afternoon light came through the restaurant's side windows at a low angle, throwing a stripe of gold across the table between them. He looked at her, not the glass. "Are you all right?" Not a greeting, not small talk. The question landed with weight behind it, specific, directed. The question of someone who already knew the answer wasn't simple. "Something to drink?" she said. His jaw moved slightly. He let the deflection pass. "Someone approached you," he said, "after the dinner." Not a question. He already knew. Jessica's hand was steady on the water jug. She said nothing. "I'm going to ask you one thing," he said. "You don't have to answer." He waited until she looked at him directly. "How did you know what it was?" The restaurant sounds continued around them, a fork against a plate at the far table. Ji-yun's voice low in the background, the hum of the kitchen. Normal sounds. Jessica stood inside all of them and made a decision about how much of herself to give to a man she did not yet know. She refilled his water glass. It didn't need refilling. "My brother," she said. Her voice was flat and factual. She had built it that way deliberately, reinforced over 3 years so it would not crack in public. "He died 3 years ago. Apapa Port, Lagos. There was a warehouse accident, a cracked container, a chemical compound stored badly. He was exposed for 6 hours before anyone understood what was in the air." She set the water jug down. "He spent 19 days in the hospital. The doctors kept showing me what to recognize, the texture, the smell, what it looked like on surfaces. A short stop. They needed me to know in case he recovered and came into contact with it again." She picked up the jug again. "His name was Chidi." She said it the way she always said it in rooms that had never held him clearly, with the full weight of it, not asking for anything in return, just insisting that he had existed. Something moved in Hajun's face. Not sympathy, something more specific, deeper, a brief tightening along his jaw that lasted less than a second and then was gone. He repeated the name quietly, once, to himself, the way a person places something carefully on a shelf. "Chidi," he said. "Yes?" Jessica moved to the next table. When Hajun left, there was an envelope under his plate. Jessica found it during clearing. She carried it to the back kitchen and opened it at the counter. Inside was cash enough to cover more than 2 weeks of her shifts. No note, no explanation. Ji-yun was beside her before she finished counting. "Again?" "Again." Ji-yun was quiet for a moment. The kitchen hummed around them, the ventilation fan, the drip of a tap someone hadn't fully closed. Then she turned to face Jessica directly. "What do you want from this?" Her voice was careful, not accusatory, genuinely asking. Jessica folded the envelope slowly. "I don't know yet." Ji-yun watched her for a moment. "That's the most honest thing you've said in months." She left it there and walked back out to the floor. Jessica stood at the counter with the folded envelope in her hand and the kitchen noise around her, and said nothing else. That night, her apartment was quiet. She sat at her small desk with Chidi's hospital file open in front of her. She did this sometimes when she couldn't sleep, not looking for anything specific, just needing to be close to him. The file was thick. Incident reports, medical records, the official documentation of everything that had happened and everything that had never been properly answered for. She read through it the way she always did, slowly, letting the familiar details settle around her. She reached the exposure report, the chain of custody documentation. She had read this section before, the warehouse operators, the safety violations, the registered company names. She knew this part. Except tonight, she kept reading, past the section she usually stopped at, past the registered operators into the parent company structure, 3 layers deep, the subsidiaries and the holding companies, and the names at the top. A logistics company, registered in Seoul. She read the parent company name. She read it again. The room temperature did not change. The desk lamp stayed yellow and steady. Her hands did not shake. But something happened in her chest, an arrival, sudden and pressurized, that was not anger and was not grief. It was something that came before both of those. Something that had no name yet because she had never felt exactly this before. She closed the folder, opened it again. The name was still there, in small black print at the bottom of the page. Ryu Hajun. 3 days passed. Jessica did not call the number on the plain card. She worked her shifts, smiled at the right moments, refilled glasses that didn't need refilling. Ji-yeon watched her from across the dining room with an expression Jessica chose not to examine too closely. She kept Hajun's name in a separate part of her mind, the same place she kept things that needed to be dealt with later, when she had space and quiet and enough distance to think clearly. She was good at that. She had been doing it for 3 years. On the 4th night, her mother called. Her mother's voice was cheerful. That was the first thing Jessica noticed, and it made the muscles between her shoulder blades tighten immediately because her mother had no reason to be alarmed, which meant she had no idea what she was describing. A man came to the house today, her mother said, very polite, well-dressed. He didn't ask to come inside, he just stood at the gate and looked around for a few minutes. Then he left a card. A small laugh. He said to give the number to you. Do you know him? Jessica's grip on her phone tightened until the bones in her hand pressed against each other. Did he go inside? She asked. Her voice came out even. She was surprised by that. No, just the gate. Jessica, what? Lock the gate tonight, Mama. What? Why would I? Please? She stopped, steadied. Lock it tonight. I'll call you tomorrow and explain everything. I love you. She ended the call before her mother could ask anything else. Her phone screen was still lit in her hand when a message arrived from a number she didn't recognize. 4 words. 48 hours, then consequences. Jessica walked to her kitchen and sat down on the floor. Not because her legs gave out, because the floor was cold and solid and honest, and right now, she needed something that didn't move. The tile was hard through her jeans. The refrigerator hummed its steady, indifferent hum. The ceiling light above her flickered once a small blink, and then held steady. She sat in the yellow light and let everything be exactly as bad as it was. She thought about Chidi's flashcards, still taped to the wall of his bedroom in Lagos, because nobody had been able to take them down yet. Korean vocabulary in his handwriting, neat and slightly too large, the way he wrote when he was being careful. Words for a city he never reached. She thought about his soul playlist. 94 songs. She thought about a name printed in small black type at the bottom of a page, 3 layers deep in a corporate document, connected by a chain of negligence to a warehouse in Apapa and a cracked container and 6 hours of exposure and 19 days and everything after. 8 minutes passed. Jessica stood up. She went to the bathroom and washed her face with cold water, keeping it on her skin until the heat in her jaw settled. She dried her face and looked at herself in the mirror for exactly 2 seconds. Then she walked back to the kitchen counter where the plain white card had been sitting for 4 days. She picked it up. She dialed. 1 ring. Jessica. His voice was steady. He had been expecting her call, or he had been expecting a call from someone, and hers was the one that arrived. They contacted my mother, she said, in Lagos. She has nothing to do with any of this. She did not fill the space that followed. She had learned that filling space was how you gave things away. Can you help her? The silence on his end was dense and brief. Her address, he said. She gave it. Her voice held through all of it, the street name, the neighborhood, the gate color. She noted this the way she noted things that mattered, and filed them for later. 3 hours, he said. Then, Jessica. Yes. Go to work tomorrow. The call ended. She set her phone face down on the counter and stood in her kitchen in the yellow light and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, 4 counts each, something a doctor had taught her in a Lagos hospital when she needed to stay functional and grief was trying to make that impossible. She was not forgiving him. She needed that to be clear, even if only to herself. The name at the bottom of that page had not moved. The connection to Chidi had not changed. What she had just done was a calculation her mother's safety against her right to stay angry, and the calculation had only one answer. That was not mercy. It was harder than mercy. She went to work the next morning. The lunch service was busy. She worked her section without thinking about it, moving on muscle memory, keeping her face arranged into the expression that said, competent and unremarkable. Ji-Yun caught her eye across the room at one point. Jessica gave her a small nod, the one that meant still standing. Ji-Yun gave one back and returned to her table. 2 hours and 43 minutes into her shift, her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. She finished pouring a water glass, excused herself to the back kitchen, and read the message standing at the steel counter under the harsh overhead light. She is safe. She will stay safe. Jessica read it twice. Then she placed her phone face down on the counter, pressed both palms flat against the cold steel surface, and stood there. The metal pulled the heat from her hands steadily. She focused on that, the temperature dropping from her palms into the counter, and breathed until the pressure behind her sternum loosened enough to function. She picked up her phone, put it back in her apron pocket, and walked back out to the floor. She finished her shift. That night, she took a different route home, cutting through a side street she didn't usually use. She varied her timing, too, left 20 minutes later than normal. She had started doing this after the bench, small adjustments that made her harder to find. The second night, a different route again. The third night, she turned onto her street and stopped walking. A dark car was parked outside her building with the engine off. She had seen it before, 3 nights ago, on the street outside Jongsik when she left after closing. She stood on the pavement in the cold and did not move toward it and did not move away. The window came down. Ryu Ha-jun looked at her from the driver's seat. No security, no driver, just him, in the dark, with the city quiet around them. I need to tell you something, he said. About your brother. Jessica got in the car. She knew exactly why, and that was precisely the part she was not ready to say out loud. She pulled the door shut, and the city outside went slightly muffled. The interior was dark and warm. The dashboard lights were low and blue. Neither of them spoke for the first 2 minutes. Seoul moved past the windows in streaks of gold and white. Late traffic, neon signs, a convenience store throwing bright light onto the wet pavement. Ha-jun drove without asking where she lived. That registered somewhere in the back of her mind he already knew, but she filed it and stayed still. He spoke first. The logistics company, he said. His eyes stayed on the road. The one connected to a Papa port. I didn't build it. I inherited it. Jessica said nothing. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her gaze on the road ahead. I was 29, he continued. There was a man I spent the next 10 years pulling apart everything he built and either shutting it down or cleaning it out. 3 years ago, I was still working through the subsidiaries. Some of them were 4, 5 acquisitions deep. His jaw moved. The Apapa warehouse was inside one of those. I didn't know what was stored there. I didn't know about the accident. The car stopped at a red light. The signal threw red across the dashboard, across his hands on the wheel. 6 months ago, my people were pulling documents from a rival's cache. There was an incident report inside it, a third-party investigation into Hexabond 9 distribution chains, Lagos Port Authority, 2021. He stopped. Your brother's name was in a footnote. Worker exposure report, Apapa Port, unresolved. The light turned green. He didn't accelerate immediately. I recognized the compound, he said. We'd been tracking it for 2 years, and then I saw his name. Jessica's throat was tight. She kept her breathing even in through the nose, measured, controlled. Why didn't you tell me, she said, at the restaurant, when I told you his name? Because he stopped, started again. I didn't know how to say it without it sounding like, I don't know, like an excuse. It is not an excuse, his hands adjusted on the wheel. I still don't know how to say it. I'm saying it anyway. The car moved through an underpass, the light dropping completely for 3 seconds, then returning. Jessica looked at the road. I'm not forgiving you tonight, she said. I'm not asking you to. They drove for another few minutes without speaking. Then Jessica said, he was loud. Ha-Jun glanced at her briefly. Cheaty, she said. He laughed too loud in quiet places. Libraries, restaurants, it didn't matter. He always forgot to adjust the volume. The corner of her mouth moved almost. He was embarrassing in the best way. Ha-Jun said nothing. He listened with the full weight of his attention, which was its own kind of response. He had flashcards for everything. Korean vocabulary, business terminology, port logistics. He made flashcards and taped them everywhere. Our mother kept finding them behind the sofa cushions for months after she stopped. Continued. He had a playlist for every neighborhood in this city. He'd never been here. He just built it anyway, ready for when he arrived. At some point, she didn't register exactly when Ha-Jun's right hand moved from the gear shift to rest on the center console, not reaching toward her. Just resting there, a few centimeters from her folded hands. He did not move closer. She did not move away. He would have liked Seoul, she said. She heard herself say it. Present tense of what could have been, not what was, not what ended, but what could have been if the container hadn't cracked and the shift supervisor had read the safety sheet and 19 days had gone differently. She had never said it that way before. She sat with the weight of it and did not look away from it. Ha-Jun's hand stayed where it was on the console. Songwan Sok, he said, after a moment. He won't be a problem anymore. Jessica understood what that meant without needing it explained. She nodded once. Your visa hold was lifted this morning. You'll get the official confirmation by tomorrow. She exhaled slowly through her nose. 4 days of walls, dismantled overnight. She noted the feeling relief, clean and sudden, and also noted that it arrived alongside something more complicated, because the man who had removed the walls was the same man whose name was at the bottom of Chidi's file. Both things were true at the same time. She was learning to hold that. The car slowed. They were on her street. What do you want now? Ha-Jun asked. Not gently, practically, directly. The question of someone who needed an actual answer. You could go home, back to Lagos. Nobody would stop you. I'm not going anywhere. She said it without hesitation, which surprised her slightly. Chidi didn't get to be here. I'm going to be here for both of us. Ha-Jun looked at her. The streetlight outside was amber, coming through the window at a low angle, and he looked at her for long enough that she felt it on the side of her face. Then I want to know you, he said. The real version. Not the one that keeps herself invisible so nobody looks too closely. Her jaw tightened. That version kept me alive. I know. His voice was even. I'm not asking her to go anywhere. I'm asking to meet the one that's been underneath her this whole time. Jessica looked at him for a moment. Then, she reached for the door handle. She got out onto the pavement. The night air was cold after the warmth of the car. Hajun did not move to follow her. She did not ask him to. She walked to her building entrance and stopped, turned around. He was watching her through the windshield, engine still running. "The compound," she said, raising her voice just enough to carry. "Hexabon 9. The distribution chain you've been tracking, did you ever find where it ends?" Something moved across his face, a sharpening, subtle, and immediate. "Not yet," he said. "I've had Chidi's file for 3 years," she said. "I traced the supply chain past the Lagos Port Authority, past the registered importers, all the way to the manufacturing source." She held his gaze. "Your people stopped 2 levels before I did." The car idled between them. The city made its sounds around the quiet space they were standing inside. "Then we have something to talk about," he said. Jessica nodded once. She went inside. She did not look back through the glass. In the elevator, the floor numbers climbed 3, 4, 5, and she stood in the small lit box and let herself think about tomorrow. Not with dread, not with the braced shoulders readiness she had carried for 2 years and 4 months. Just thought about it, plain and forward-facing. The doors opened. She walked into her apartment, set her bag down, and opened her laptop. Chidi's hospital file was still on the screen where she'd left it, his name in the document header, the cursor blinking at the bottom of the last page. She did not close it. She opened a new document beside it, the 2 windows sitting side by side on the screen. She started typing. Jessica came to Seoul carrying her brother's name and nothing else. She left that restaurant carrying something she didn't expect, and she still doesn't know what to do with it. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment telling me the one moment that hit you hardest. Was it the whisper, the floor, or the 2 hands that almost touched in a dark car? Like this video so the next chapter finds the people who need it. And subscribe, because Jessica and Hajun are not finished, and neither am I.